Hello, fundamental Bitcoiners. This week we were treated to a live debate on Tone Vays' YouTube channel between two economists who I hold in high regard, Peter Schiff and Saifedean Ammous. The topic was gold versus Bitcoin. During the financial crisis in 2007 and 2008, while working on the Ron Paul campaign of that year, I started to follow Peter Schiff. He reintroduced me to some of the Austrian economic thinking that I first encountered in libertarian zines back in the early 90s. Peter is right about the long-term prospects for the US dollar and the US federal government finances. He will almost certainly come back into the limelight when the next crisis is upon us because he is a perma-bear. He can deliver reliable "I told you so" lines and zingers for the financial news networks. For him, it seems like the sky is always falling, disaster is just around the corner, and the answer is always to buy gold. Conveniently, he is in the business of selling gold. He markets gold coins through his company Schiff. I believe his clientele may be aging, and by trolling and triggering Bitcoiners, he gets his brand and message in front of a younger generation who potentially may become customers for gold. Now, I own gold. It has its place. But half my gold was purchased above the current price. I do not plan to sell any, but I will not be buying any more gold at this point. I'm watching the price of gold in Bitcoin go down, down, down. Perhaps when this reverses, I will take an interest. As an aside, I recently brought some gold back to the US. I passed through 3 or 4 metal detectors on various flights and transit areas in 3 jurisdictions and had to conceal it in a heavy change purse containing many other conventional coins so it looked like a pile of change on the scanners. It's a pain. At any moment, you know, security could pull you aside and ask to see it. Is it a financial instrument? Am I violating some regulation? I have no idea. Bitcoin is infinitely easier to conceal and to cross borders with, even in very large amounts. You don't even have to have it with you. It's just there when you arrive, even if you travel empty-handed. That alone makes it a superior choice. Portable, liquid, easily concealed. Also, how could you verify gold? You have to have an expensive X-ray machine and mass spectrometer to be completely sure you have actual gold. One of the gold dealers I used to buy from had this equipment, and he would scan the coins in your presence when you bought. With Bitcoin, you only need a computer and some free Bitcoin software to verify if you have real Bitcoin. Again, no comparison. Austrian economists have great fondness for gold, in contrast to the Keynesian orthodoxy, which hates gold with a passion. It's clear that the Austrian economists deeply influenced Satoshi Nakamoto in the creation of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is often described as a kind of digital gold. In many ways, Bitcoin is a real-life experiment that we are all participating in to test the validity and superiority of the Austrian ideas. Ideas which have never found fashion or acceptance within orthodox academic circles. You can get a PhD in economics and never really grapple with any of the Austrians. Most MBAs who take a couple of econ classes at best will never have encountered any of this stuff. Taking up the Bitcoin side of the debate was Saifedean Ammous, professor of economics at the American University in Lebanon, whose recent book, The Bitcoin Standard, is required reading if you want to understand Bitcoin's economics properly. You cannot understand Bitcoin without digging into the thinking of the Austrian school. Some of us who are both Austrians and Bitcoiners are puzzled by the significant contingent of Austrians who seem to resist Bitcoin strongly, like Peter. Well, Peter looks not too much older than me, and thus closer to my generation than the boomers. His objections echo the sentiments of most people over 60 when they encounter Bitcoin. They just can't get over the non-physical aspect. Very analog. Receptivity to Bitcoin versus gold is highly age dependent. And while under 35s may be splitting some of their savings, perhaps as much as 60-40 stocks to Bitcoin, I guarantee that 99% of them have a 0% allocation to gold. They are not yet Peter's customers, and Peter's arguments probably sound like old fogey stuff to them. You need to live through at least one big bear market or financial crisis before gold begins to appeal. With his quick wit and formidable debate skills, Peter makes the most intelligent anti-Bitcoin arguments that can be made. Despite his familiarity with most of the relevant economic thought, he seems to miss one key tenet of the Austrian school. All value is subjective. There is no such thing as intrinsic value. From this premise, we can derive that all human financial activity is speculative in nature. Choosing to hold one asset over another, even if that chosen asset is the most liquid, saleable, and most stable in value, i.e. it's the best money, is in itself speculative. Choosing to hold money is speculative. Therefore, even saving is a kind of speculation. This is a subtle but consistent error that I have noticed among sophisticated investors who are ideologically aligned, people like Peter Schiff and Simon Black, which I think taps a deeper psychological and political theme. Peter and many others seem to think that speculative uses of Bitcoin are inferior or morally wrong. This comes out when people bemoan that Bitcoin is not yet useful for everyday purchases, such as buying coffee. They see people purchasing Bitcoin with the expectation of future gains in purchasing power as somehow wrong or objectionable, an inferior or inappropriate use. It's as if the best use of money is to spend it. Yet these same people engage in and promote various investments by which they or their followers hope to enjoy a gain. These same people complain that American consumers spend too much and save too little and have too much debt. Something about Bitcoin particularly irks them. Successful men like these ought not to suffer envy per se, but they do seem to look at the nerds who collected Bitcoin early, now known as whales, as somehow enjoying unearned wealth. They were just lucky. Were they? We do rightly have an aversion to people whose wealth is unearned per se. I particularly do not care for people whose wealth is largely a product of government policy, contracts, or lobbying efforts. They are a different breed from the entrepreneurs meeting the needs of the market. But today, people who put real money into Bitcoin in hopes that it will be a better store of value or that they will enjoy increased purchasing power in the future are no different in kind or degree to anyone who holds some asset in hopes of a gain. They are anticipating the desires of other people in the future. This is a fundamentally entrepreneurial calculation. Foregoing consumption and buying any sort of liquid asset is purchasing an option on future consumption. It is delayed gratification. It's expression of a low time preference. It is the essence of civilization and capital formation. Bitcoin produces no income itself, but income does not inherently confer legitimacy to an asset. It is a quality which makes an asset more or less desirable according to someone's strategy and situation. Again, all value is subjective. In capitalism, we act to acquire assets and put them to a higher and better use, as we see it individually and imperfectly. The sum total of these individual decisions has yielded a Cambrian explosion of material well-being for humanity, taking us from scratching in the dirt and hunting wild beasts generations ago to flying across oceans and planning to settle other planets. At the same time, there is a great confusion about how the system works, because there are forces ideologically opposed to such unfettered human progress. These groups are powerful. Their work is both pervasive and subtle. The effects of their wrong teachings and propaganda persist even when among capitalists who have achieved great success within the system. So I have to ask, if you have a problem with people speculating in Bitcoin, a free market monetary medium that competes entirely on its own merits without any assistance from government, do you really believe in free markets and human liberty? Another point that came up in the debate, which many gold bugs bring up as justification for gold's monetary role, is that it has other non-monetary uses. The non-monetary utility of a given monetary medium, like the industrial and decorative uses of gold, while useful in bootstrapping its adoption perhaps as money, eventually formed a hindrance and not a support to its monetary role. By contrast, nearly the entirety of Bitcoin's value is in its monetary role, monetary utility. It has no other function. It began as a collectible novelty for nerds, and now it is a worldwide system for securing and transmitting human value. The early adopters who collected Bitcoin early on saw its potential and supported it when it was in its infancy. This was an incredibly risky bet on something apparently frivolous at the time and unlikely to be of much use. Now look at it. The last thing Peter seems not to understand at all is the nature of open source software and network or peer-to-peer communication protocols, arrived at through voluntary consensus. If you do not understand these things, you will make the error of thinking that there can be many coins or a next Bitcoin the way Facebook supplanted MySpace. Centralized systems created by corporations like these social network websites are relatively susceptible to being replaced by innovation and market activity. On the contrary, take TCP/IP for example, the network protocol that our computers and devices use to speak to any other computer or device on the planet. This has changed very little in 30 years. In fact, the technology people have been trying to upgrade IPv4 to something called IPv6 for a decade, and it is projected that this will take several decades more. Why? Because social consensus and network effects are hard to overcome. Because every device running TCP/IP needs to use the new protocol and be configured properly to take advantage of it. You probably have no idea how to configure TCP/IP on all the devices in your home and office. Actually, no one does. You probably don't have a full inventory of the devices that speak this language. They are all made by different vendors, some now defunct, some of the software is burned into chips and not upgradable at all. This type of thing would take forever. Once Bitcoin is widely distributed enough, it becomes almost impossible to upgrade or replace, and the switching cost to some new incompatible protocol is just too high. We may already be past this point. It's more like a language than a technology product. Suggesting that we can easily switch to something new is rather like telling Americans we should all start speaking a different language. Once enough people, devices, businesses speak Bitcoin, Bitcoin will be hard to remove or replace. In any case, it was a great debate between Peter and Saifedean. If you want to hear all the best anti-Bitcoin arguments stated clearly and forcefully, give it a watch or a listen. These two do talk over each other a bit, but don't let that put you off. It is worth your time. The most productive debates can be had between people who already share a lot of views in common. When the distance is too great, there's too much disagreement over terminology and people just talk past each other. This is one of those gems with so much common ground between the debaters that their disagreements are illuminating. And I want to thank them both again for doing it. It was a real pleasure to watch. Thank you guys. Bye.